This video is going to be talking about the basics of informative speaking. So before we actually get too much into how to do informative speaking and all that, we need to have a little bit of background knowledge. Let's go ahead and jump into that. We'll be talking about informative speaking versus persuasive speaking, as well as the types of informative speeches that we might be giving. So first off, let's talk about how informative speaking differs from persuasive speaking. A lot of people prefer giving persuasive speeches over informative speeches, and it makes sense. When you're giving a persuasive speech, you're telling the audience what you want them to do, that you think that you have a better way of doing something or a better way of thinking about something than they do, and to convince them that you're right and that they should agree with you. That happens a lot in our day-to-day lives, right? We try to convince people that we know what's going on. However, that's not what we're trying to do with an informative speech. With an informative speech, instead of trying to influence our audience, what we're trying to do is provide our audience with information. And we try to provide them with information so that they can try and make a decision on their own about what they believe about a topic. So, really what's important about informative speaking, and the biggest thing to remember about informative speaking, in terms of its being different than persuasive speaking, is when we speak to inform, we're seeking to be objective. So we need to present information from both sides of an issue. We can't just say, you should go out and you should start voting independent, for instance. We would need to say, these are the positive aspects of voting independent, and these are the negative aspects of voting independent. So that our audience members can say, okay, so these are the benefits I can see, these are the detriments I can see, and based on how this fits into my experiences, my own knowledge, this is what I should be doing. So we don't ever say at the end of an informative speech, you should do this. Instead, we'll say something like, with this information, we can make better decisions. With this information, we'll know what we want to do in the future. That type of thing. So that's how informative and persuasive speeches differ. There are three different types of informative speeches. The first type that we might give, the first type of informative speech we might give might be a speech to impart knowledge. Now, when you're imparting knowledge, what you're doing is you've looked at your audience and you've said, okay, about this topic I'm talking about, my audience doesn't know anything about it, so I need to just do more of a broad overview of the topic. I'm not going to go super in-depth about this. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give my audience a chance to start to understand more about it. Okay? So, for example, if you were going to give a speech about something about bandages that are made out of shrimp shells, which actually do exist, your audience members might not know anything about that. There's a product called Celox that's made of these shrimp shells that seals up injuries and wounds, and it's a really cool product. If I wanted to give a speech about that, and I thought, you know, I don't think anybody in my audience knows about this type of bandage, then I would need to make sure that I'm creating an imparting knowledge type of informative speech. Basically, what I would need to do is I'd need to say, okay, these are the most important parts about this bandage. This is the stuff that people need to know, so I need to organize this information in this way. Okay? You start at the very beginning, and you help your audience start to understand. The second type of informative speech that you might give might be a deepening understanding speech. When you try to deepen understanding for your audience, what you're assuming is that your audience already knows something about the topic. So what you're going to be telling them is some more in-depth information. Okay? So let's take the topic of eggs. I think most of us in an audience would probably know what an egg is. We probably already understand what you can do with eggs, how you can cook eggs, things like that. So if you wanted to give a speech about eggs to an audience that already knows about them, what you'd need to do is you'd need to choose some information that we don't already know that you think we might be interested in. So if we're a group of chemists and you're wanting to talk about eggs to a group of chemists, maybe you would want to talk about the chemical makeup of eggs, or the way that the chemical makeup of eggs changes as we cook them in a certain way, and that's the way it impacts their taste. All right? So in terms of figuring out how you can deepen understanding, you need to think about what your audience already knows about your topic, and then tell them something that they don't already know. Because if you're just repeating stuff we already know, it's not going to be an interesting speech. The third type of informative speech is a speech to permit application. All right, and that's just a fancy way of saying that we're giving a how-to speech. So at the end of our speech, our audience should know something or know how to do something, how to accomplish something. All right. So for instance, you might be able to give a permitting application speech about making a peanut butter sandwich. Now again, you don't want to give a speech about a topic your audience already knows a lot about, because they're not going to care, they're not going to listen. We probably already understand how to make a peanut butter sandwich, but with a permitting application speech, we would do that step-by-step type of thing to walk our audience members through it. So if you remember back to the creating an outline speech, it was something about how to make low-sodium spaghetti sauce. So that would be an example of that permitting application speech. So think about what your audience already knows about your topic, and then decide what type of information would be helpful for them to know. And at the end of it, make sure that you're not saying, so with this information you should do this, because that's a persuasive speech. Instead, you want to say, with this information, if you are encountering a situation in which you need it, you'll now be better prepared.